Hi everyone, this is Mateo Vigo, Head of TOC at TOC Worldwide, and I'm here with Andy Tam from DP World, who just gave us a really good session about decarbonization. Hi Andy, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me today.
No, it's great to have you. And Andy, as I was saying, it was really cool to hear what you were talking about at the session and the very engaging discussion that came afterwards. And I just wanted to ask you a few more questions to learn a little bit more about how we can, reduce carbon emissions. You talked a little bit about regulations and how they can enable decarbonizations, but not on their own. It's also necessary to have some incentives. So in that regard, regulations come from the public sector, and then the incentives may come from also the public, but also the private sector. How do you think they can work together to facilitate the decarbonization of the sector, of the industry?
I think that's a really interesting question because, as you mentioned, regulation right, comes from governments, incentives come from regulation from governments, right? What can private sector entities do? And I think some great examples are when we have public-private partnerships together, right? That I think when I think back in terms of examples, highway infrastructure, for example, are very much triple Ps, right? Power sector, even ports now are very much triple Ps, right? And what I've seen work is that the private investor actually has to have a very strong decarbonization strategy as well, right? And so when we think about that, actually, you think, okay, so a lot of the private sector folks are maybe large pension funds or large, index funds, that kind of stuff, right? So they actually manage people's money, and it all depends on what those stakeholders are looking for. So essentially, we need aligned values between, government, right, and also private. Lastly, I would like to say that any triple P requires basically fair and equitable pricing, right? And so in addition to that, it needs to be for the long term, because having that long-term view basically gives the confidence to both the government sector and the private sector to make those investments to drive for decarbonization.
Yeah, I know, and I like the fact that you mentioned the long-term view, because a lot of these sort of like net zero goals in 2030, 2040, 2050, are looking at the long term, and definitely that also comes with an investment. You've mentioned the PPPs, and I wonder, I'm not an expert, but I wonder, is it maybe sometimes difficult to visualize the return on that investment, the ROI, especially when we're talking about the long term? How do you think this can be more visible for stakeholders in the industry?
Yeah, this is the crux of the question, right? This is like, because we discussed at TOC, right, basically to move forward any of these decarb projects, a lot of times it's about the financing. It's about the return on investment, right? And so the way that I see, you can break it down into three areas, actually. You can break it down into, number one, the hurdle rate, so your financing or interest rate that you get for the project. And you can break it down into your CapEx and your OpEx. Okay, let me quickly explain those. So essentially what we need to do is we need favorable financing, and this can be from green loans, it can be from green bonds, favorable things that the government or private entities can issue for bonds, right? And so having that hurdle rate low will help you with your financial model, right? Because as you know, all projects are based upon financial models, your internal rate of return, your net present value, and all the three things that I mentioned are actually the three key variables within that calculation. So favorable financing. Now, when we talk about CapEx, a lot of people focus on CapEx, and rightfully so. What we need there is, as I mentioned in the presentation, is actually understanding what subsidies we can get to help reduce that CapEx burden. And there are programs, for example, in Canada that we leverage. There's a federal green shipping corridor program that actually helps you subsidize the amount of CapEx within your project. And then lastly, on the OpEx side, right? Because a lot of people focus on the CapEx, but realistically, your internal rate of return is calculated a lot based upon the benefit streams that you can realize. And so from that perspective, we're talking about tax breaks, right? But more operationally for port operators, it's about efficiency gains, right? Are we able to reduce the cost of our electricity, reduce the amount that we use, right? Those are the things that will help drive your internal rate of return and your NPV calculation favorably.
Yeah, because I guess in the end, still a business. There is still an operation that needs to happen. So I think it's finding maybe that sweet spot where sustainability meets profitability and operational efficiency. That makes me think, makes me question actually, do you envision potential, business opportunities in decarbonization initiatives for ports, for terminals in the industry?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's something that we face actually on a daily basis, right? But what we see is that being green doesn't necessarily come at a cost per se. And from that perspective, it's number one, staying relevant, right? So the entire industry and the entire world is moving towards net zero, right? If we're left behind, so to speak, right, we will lose contracts, we will lose investors. And what we're seeing is a lot of our investors are actually actively asking us, what are we doing in decarbonization? I would say that maybe 5 years ago, having a sustainability report was just a checkbox, right? Great. Fast forward a couple more years, they're asking, do you have a decarbonization strategy? Check now. Last year, they're asking about, do you have an adaptation plan, right? Do you have an action plan to manage and mitigate the risk from climate change? Check. As you can see, our investors are getting increasingly more sophisticated within this realm of sustainability. And so if we're not there, we will lose that investor. Okay, so that's the investor perspective. But secondly, there's also commercialization opportunities, right? We can essentially charge green fees, so to speak, to our customers. We can also have very innovative programs. So one thing that DP World is doing specifically in our Southampton port is the shift to intermodal program. So what this does is basically for every container that comes in, we charge £10, right? But if you as a customer are willing to shift your mode of operation after the port from road transport to rail transport, we will incentivize you £70. Right? This whole financial mechanism is designed to be a not loss-making, not profit-making mechanism. So it's net zero, so to speak, right? But that will help incentivize our customers to be more green and also to basically reduce our scope 3 emissions. So you can see that there's many different things. And last thing I'll touch upon is on the efficiency piece, right? As you know, many of the green equipment that we buy is more efficient, right? Have longer amortization periods. And so from that perspective, we can save money on the OpEx side, as I talked about. So I think those are the key areas that we can really leverage to not just think of sustainability and decarbonization as a cost center, but a commercial and profit-making area as well.
Yeah, it's a whole vertical, and again, it's staying relevant and finding the value beyond just being green.
One last thing I would like to add, right? Like as DP World, we are SBTi verified, right? So SBTi verified is the gold standard in the industry for sustainability. And what that really means is that we have a very actionable roadmap and an actionable plan to reach our net zero goals. And from that perspective, having that stamp of approval is really huge for our customers, for our investors, because they understand that not only is DP World, having a decarb roadmap, but actually something that's actionable. Right? We talked about a lot of the folks in the session earlier that there's a lot of greenwashing going on. Being SBTi verified means that you're not doing anything remotely close to greenwashing, right? Because they're very strict in terms of the criteria, methodology, and your action plan that you're using to reach your net zero goals.
No, that's great, because especially because everyone wants to achieve net zero, be carbon neutral, etc. Yes, there's a lot of greenwashing, and as you said, having that shows that you are not doing greenwashing and that you have a clear plan. And I think that's one of the main barriers for the industry, because everyone wants to get there, but not many people know how to get there. You just mentioned you have a roadmap. I think that's great. I think we're running out of time for this interview, but I want to thank you so much for all your insights. And basically, if you're watching, you need to know that sustainable and profit are not mutually exclusive. Join them together. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you, Mateo.